70 years ago, Latino parents successfully sued to end segregation in Orange County schools. Mendez versus Westminster was a precursor to an even more famous court case 7 years later, Brown versus Board of Education. On this anniversary of Mendez, we revisit what schooling was like back then and talk about what it's like today. Does the fight for classroom equality go on? I'll ask Sandra, Robbie, who won an Emmy for her documentary about Mendez, and OC School Superintendent Alma Mijares. They're next on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
All your life, people talk about what's best for you. But to most people, it's just that. Talk. Unless you're with Memorial Care, a healthcare system devoted to one important thing: what's best for you.
Blown off the freeway last night.
Terrible.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. I said, wow.
It was roaring last night.
Yeah, exactly. It really was, yeah. Hi, I'm Reiff, and I'm talking with Sandra, Robbie, and Alma Mijares. Thank you to both of you for coming on. So, Sandra, you have devoted most of your life, it seems, in these recent years to this historic Orange County case of Mendez versus Westminster. Tell us how did you get involved in this?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Rick. Mendez versus Westminster is my passion. I grew up in Westminster, California, W for Westminster, and I didn't learn about the case until I had small children of my own. And it was a moment, as I was reading in the newspaper about a school that was going to be built named in honor of the Mendez family. Here was a city that I knew intimately, and this history I knew nothing about. I could feel the walls spinning around me. And it was an absolute paradigm shift. That morning, I knew that by the time I was done, everybody was going to know about Mendez. So I ended up going back to school, took TV production classes. I became the world's oldest intern at our public television station, working with you a little bit.
That's right.
When we did the documentary on Mendez, and it was a very humble film, but I'm very happy to say that it ended up winning an Emmy and helped to get the ball rolling for achieving the dream I had of celebrating Mendez all across the country.
Yes, and what's your own background?
So I'm Mexican-American, was born in Tucson, moved to Orange County, Westminster when I was just 1 year old. My grandmother was born in Arizona the year before it became a state. So I'm third generation English-speaking Mexican-American, but first generation college graduate and full-on Mendez maniac.
Wow. And how did you actually said you found out about it? What, did you read it in a book? Or?
It was in the Orange County Register, a story about the school that was going to be built. And what blew me away is that from my grade school through college, I mean, this case took place during World War II, during the Japanese internment. It involved Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren, who were involved with Brown versus Board of Education. I mean, it doesn't get bigger than Brown versus Board of Education.
All of those elements, yeah.
And I thought, how could nobody anywhere in my schooling have thought this was not important to mention any place? Because one of the life truths that became apparent to me from learning about Mendez versus Westminster is the importance of the stories we tell. The stories we tell us who we are and who we can be. And growing up, I had Ricky Ricardo on TV. He looked kind of like my dad. But other than that, I got the clear message that I could not do television. Once I learned about Mendez, it was like, out of the way. I am worthy. People fought for me before I was even born. And this story, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if it hadn't been for Mendez versus Westminster. I would not have gone to the White House. We wouldn't have had a U.S. postage stamp. We wouldn't have had Mendez voted into the new ethnic studies guidelines. All of those things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have had this story. And once I understood that, I thought all of our children have to have this story, because this crosses cultures. It's Jewish culture, Asian American, Native American, African American, and it opens the door to talk about how this story reflects today. Right. And so that is why I am so impassioned about it. Even with LGBTQ stories, all of this opens the door to talk about how is this relevant today? And that's what I want every one of our children to have, a story that helps to show how they absolutely matter and their voice makes a difference.
I just wish you were a little more passionate about it, Sandra. You know, but anyways, Al, you actually knew a little bit about Mendez before it was cool, before Sandra made it cool to know about Mendez. So talk about, because you before you were the superintendent of Orange County Schools, you were the superintendent in Santa Ana, and you had some exposure to Mendez. Talk about that.
Yes, and first of all, thank you for having me, and I do want to salute Sandra for her amazing work. She's made a phenomenal, indelible print in terms of this case. I was superintendent of the Santa Ana Unified School District, and we were at the time one of the most, perhaps the most densely populated cities in California. And we had received special funding to build the school. And so we designated the location. It was going to be on 17th and Bristol. And then the Board of Education went through a naming process. And it's through that process that I became familiar with the Mendes family and the case. Wow. And it has been life-changing ever since. When we think of what was accomplished there to end the separate but equal doctrine, which had been established in the late 1800s by the U.S. Supreme Court, to end that just made an impression that will never be forgotten, and it has imbued, as Sandra just mentioned, all cultures, all cities, the country, and in fact the globe, for that matter.
Okay, well let's now take a look. We have some excerpts from the documentary, so that folks watching can get a feel for this documentary you did. We're going to run a few minutes of it. We're going to hear first from Sylvia Mendez, who was one of the students that whose folks were suing to allow her into the neighborhood, the regular neighborhood school. We'll also hear from Ralph Perez, who was a parent in another district, right, in El Medina. And then Sylvia, again, a gentleman, Christopher Areola, who...
he's an attorney. He actually grew up in El Medina, went to El Medina High School, but he's passionate about Mendes.
And he's giving some perspective. And then, again, Sylvia. So these are the people we're about to see. Let's roll.
When we came back to Westminster, was like 1943, and he decided that he would ask my Aunt Sally to take us and go enroll us in Westminster School. We were living on Edward Street, so we weren't living where he had been raised. He had been raised in the Mexican district there on Olive Street, where all the Mexicans lived. Now we lived all the way on the other side of Westminster, where the farm was. And so he told my Aunt Sally, take her to school and enroll the kids and enroll them there on 17th Street, because that's where we belong. That's the district we belong. So when she gathered us all up, it was Gonzalo and Jerome and her two children. It was Alice and Virginia. So when we got to the school, they told her, Miss Vidari, you can leave your kids here, but your brother's kids, Gonzalo's kids, will have to go to the Mexican school. The Mexicans are segregated here in Westminster. They have to go to the Mexican school. But my Aunt Sally said, well, why am I going to leave mine here? She says, well, yours don't have to go there. You know, my Aunt Sally's last name was Vidari. She had married a Mexican that was part French, and his last name was Vidari, and the kids were very light-skinned, Alice. And so the next day he decided he'd go to the school board here in Westminster, and they told him the same thing. I'm sorry, Mr. Mendes, but there's nothing we can do. So he decided to go to the school board, the Orange County School Board, and they told him, well, Mr. Mendes, they said the same thing. Well, my father thought it was such an injustice, because the school in Westminster, the Hoover School, was made out of, it was a terrible little shack. I don't even remember having any monkey bars or any swings or anything like that to play with. In fact, when we had to eat lunch, we would go outside and eat lunch in the tables that were right next to the cow pasture, so we get all the flies there from the cow pasture. So my father thought that was so horrible. So then he was talking to this man that used to come to the farm and bring the produce from, to take the produce back to Los Angeles, to Alameda, and he said, Mr. Mendes, I know about a lawyer, Mr. Marquez, that will help you. He will fight. He has fought where the Mexicans aren't allowed to go to the parks in Los Angeles, and they're not allowed to go to the swimming pools until Sunday when the water's very dirty. Then they're allowed to, but they can't go during the week. He said he has fought those two cases and he has won. I'm sure he'll help you. Well, at that time, he was making a lot of money. It was during the war. They used to make like $1,000 a day. They had like 40 acres of asparagus, and they had leased some other acres from another man, and it was tomatoes. They were growing tomatoes and chilies. And so he had the money, so he decided he hired the lawyer and he started working on it.
I was discharged from the service in May of 1946, and that school semester, October and September, you know, I was involved in it. Because my daughter Janice, you know, the smallest daughter, she was enrolled in the school at the Roosevelt School, which was a non-segregated school. And pretty soon here's 10 other children that went in, and their parents said, well, how come you enrolled the Perez family and you won't take our children? And we already had one daughter at that school there, Carol, the oldest. And so Hammerstein, the principal, the superintendent of the schools, he thought that the easiest way to solve the problem was to transfer my daughter to the Lincoln School, which was a segregated school. And there all heck broke loose right there.
During the Ninth Circuit Court, there was appeals that were sent in, briefs, and it was from the American Jewish Congress, it was one from the Japanese Congress, it was Lawyers Guild, and the NAACP, and Thurgood Marshall was also involved in the Mendes because he had sent briefs in because he was a lawyer for the NAACP.
The National Lawyers Guild, the NAACP, argued that America could not be like Nazi Germany and segregate the different races of Europe, for example.
And they all fought, and finally they did win. A few months later, Governor Ward, he was a governor at that time here in California, and he decided that he would desegregate the whole California after this trial. June 1947. So California has always been number one. That was 8 years before the Brown versus Board of Education, when the whole nation was desegregated. We say that in the Mendes case, the two very important people, Thurgood Marshall, that helped the Mendes and later became the lawyer for the Brown versus the Board of Education, and Governor Warren, who was our governor here in desegregated California, later was a Supreme Court justice that desegregated the whole nation. The two people that were involved in the Mendes case later desegregated the whole nation.
Wow, just fascinating how you had Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren and playing such key roles in Mendes, and then 7 years later in Brown Board of Education. It's incredible.
You know, that's one of the things that just so captured me about Mendes is that, I mean, there are no bigger civil rights histories in our school than Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren, and that they helped to pave the way to Brown versus Board of Education through Mendes, and they were involved first. And in fact, the friend of the court brief they contributed served as the model for Brown. It doesn't get bigger than that. And for students in Orange County and even across the country, students of all colors who I've spoken with about this are saying, why don't we know this? We all need to feel this. And it's Anglos, Latinos, Asian Americans. This is America's story. And that's why we're not going back. We're not stopping until everybody across America celebrates.
And one of the other storylines in your documentary, we didn't show it just now, but it's an important part, is the role of the Japanese, or the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Explain how that plays into the whole Mendes story.
You know, it's really important that there are so many people involved in the case. You know, Mendes, we're talking about the Mendes family, but it was a class action suit that involved 5 families, Mendez, Estrada, Palomino, Guzman, and Ramirez, and Santa Ana, Garden Grove, El Medina, and Westminster. That is powerful in itself, but also that the Mendez family moved to Westminster to lease land from the Munamitsus, who were being sent to an internment camp at Poston, Arizona. Without that, this case would have never happened. And we have desegregated the way we talk about about our schools, but we don't desegregate the way we talk about American civil rights history. And I think it's so important that we finally blow down the walls to show that we are connected in every way in making American civil rights happen. So including the Munamitsu family is what also truly inspired me to make sure that this story is told for all of our children.
Yeah, and talk about when you approached the Munamitsu family, because you wound up talking to a couple of daughters who recalled this handsome Mexican farmer. They giggled about how cute he was and things like that. But they had no idea of the historical significance until you approached them.
Yes, when I was doing my research, I found a few Munamitsus in the phone book, if anybody remembers what a phone book was. But I started calling down the line, and I actually spoke with Janice's mother first, but she feigned that she didn't know anything about this at all. And when I finally got to Janice, she said that for her parents' age, that the internment is something that is too painful and too horrific to talk about. And so when Janice's mom actually passed away, she found the original lease agreements between the Munamitsus and the Mendez family, and those are now in a special collection at Chapman University in a small Mendez archive that they have there.
Wow, wow. So, so Al, you know, bringing this story to today, I find it ironic and maybe sad in a way that back then you had Mexican-American parents who were suing so that their kids could go to the neighborhood school.
Right.
Nowadays you have some Mexican-American parents who are suing to get their kids out of the neighborhood school, which they say is underperforming, and getting them into a charter school. And there's a lot of debate about that. You're the man. You're the superintendent of Orange County Schools. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just comment in terms of the case itself, because when you look at the body of information that was used to segregate the schools, you see how condemning it really is. They made comments about the intellectual capacity of Latino students. They challenged their ability to speak another language, a second language. There were statements made about their hygiene, and they just summarily dismissed these students as though they were less than human. And I think to stand up against that was such a noble thing to do, because it changed the trajectory of students both now and in the future. Now, in terms of our schools, it is our responsibility to assure that every school, local, be it alternative school, charter school, whatever it happens to be, but that it is strong, that it is delivering. That's the whole goal of accountability, obviously, both at the state and local level, as well as the federal level, and is to make sure that these schools are delivering. And I think that we have a responsibility to look at the school, determine what are the needs of students and their families, and come together and make a decision as to the best path for our children. I think that we have to capitulate to the needs of parents. You know, parents are the first teachers, and they have to be at the fore of the instructional program. So in terms of charter schools, they're definitely part of the American landscape in terms of education, public education. If you think of charter schools, it really is a small percentage of students and schools in California, or in the country for that matter. So although that is one option, the most important thing that we do is to make sure that that local school district and school is strong.
Now, in California, charter schools are public schools, but there's more local control, and there's and there's some of the rules pertaining to teachers and that kind of thing that are put aside. So they have more flexibility. So you just said they're a small percentage. Some people would say they should be a larger percentage. That when charter schools have their enrollment, you know, there's 10 times as many parents applying as they can accept. Should there be more charter schools?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that they're part of the environment, and I personally don't have a problem with charter schools that exist today, and even more coming on board. But you have to be mindful of the fact that not every charter school succeeds. There are some that get into financial difficulty. There are others that have issues in terms of the instructional program.
I know, Al, you're dancing around a little. I asked you if there should be more, and obviously there's some that don't work. There's some regular public schools that don't work either. You know, so
well, the easy answer is yes. The correct answer is yes. But I don't want to dismiss the responsibility of the local school system that takes the lion's share of revenue to educate students. And to just simply say, create more charters, that's the answer, I think it's far too simplistic. I think charter schools are important, they're viable, they're strong, we need them because they help to create innovation. But at the same time, our local school districts are all about innovation too, and they should be. And if they're not, then there's another problem.
Yeah, Sandra, do you have any strong feeling about the whole issue of school choice, charter schools, and whether this is something that actually is helpful to Mexican American and other minority kids?
Well, I always just frame everything within the context of Mendez. For me, that including stories like Mendez, it changes the narrative of who people are, who they think they are, and who they can be. And so I think that including these stories can help all of our schools, whether they're charter or public schools, but also that one of the things that I always am a little bit irritated at is during Hispanic Heritage Month, they'll often talk about how, there are schools now that are 95% Latino, but Mendez was fought segregation is a symptom of a deeper issue, and that is that Mendes was fought to provide access, equal access and equal opportunity. And until our schools are funded equally and everybody has a truly equal education, this is going to be a big problem. And so that's where I stand on this.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say that the Gonzalo and Felicitas Mendes School here in Santa Ana is not a charter school. It is a fundamental school, and it's a school with a very unique mission. And if you drill down and you look at the levels of achievement of students, you'll find tremendous success there. You look at where these students are going to high school and then on to higher education, you'll see a clear path of success.
Okay.
But at the same time, we definitely need a plethora of schools that are going to meet the needs of students. And so I would be the last person to stand in the way of a parent, let's say, or a family who wants to advocate for their children for a certain education. My job is to support them. At the same time, I'm mindful of the accountability angle.
Well, it seems like, and of course, you sometimes have to be the arbiter, the Board of Education, the county board, because a school district will say no to a charter, and sometimes they come to you guys, and you guys say yes.
The County Board of Education has the authority to absolutely approve that charter school. Then the responsibility becomes ours. Now we are responsible for them, and
you have several, right?
We accept the responsibility gladly. Yes, we do.
Okay, I want to, but just before we close, let's take a look at two more excerpts from your incredible documentary. We're going to look at Felicitas Mendes, who was the mother who brought this historic suit, and then her son, Jerome Mendez, who got to go to the neighborhood school.
I'm proud that that at least we had the courage to do it, to fight for, not for our children, but for the other children, their children and their children, and for all the communities.
It was very difficult at first. It was always in trouble. But what was really amazing is that kids forget quick. And it wasn't long before I was getting along with all the kids and being invited to go places with them and even to their homes. If they're integrated and they grow up from a young age, they don't have that prejudice that existed back then so badly, because they grow up together. They might call each other names, but usually they're like most kids, in a few minutes it's gone. And it doesn't matter if he's a Latino or black or Oriental, because they're growing up together, all together in the same schools. So they're like, well, what the country says, united. They're all united, that's what they are. And they make one country. And I think that's probably the greatest part of it.
Wow, Sandra, that really, that's a grabber there. And I thought Jerome's comments were really moving. And that picture, where did you find that picture of the Caucasian boy with his arm around his Mexican American friend?
We researched long and hard to find the right photos for the story, and that really is it tells everything. That's what this is all about. The American Civil Rights story is about all of us every day, and I'm glad that you felt it, because the way that our narrative is now is that people still believe it's truly a black and white issue, but I'm hoping that by sharing Mendez that we all see that we're all connected every day.
Yeah, and Jerome seems like a guy who just doesn't have a prejudiced bone in his body.
Beautiful man. I know the family as well. And let me just also say that what I like about that is it creates the sacredness of education and the founding doctrine of this country, and that's liberation, freedom. That's what education does, and that's what the Mendes family did for America.
Yeah. So, well, Sandra, thanks very much. You've still got a lot of things going on.
Absolutely. We're working on a couple of things. You know, seeing that Mendes is taught in all of our schools has been the goal, and I knew that institutional change is the long game.
And now we're out of time, but we are going to get, we do have an open mic segment, and I want to hear a lot more about what's on the horizon for Mendes. That's it for now. Thanks again to my guests, Sandra, Robbie, and Alma Harris. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University is a proud sponsor of Inside OC and community programming.